I would go into television organizations and talk about how digital is going to disrupt what you're doing. They literally kicked me out of meetings. I just ruined my career. I had a great digital advertising career. I literally just ruined my career.
Imagine you're the CEO of Mediaocean, the mission-critical platform for omnichannel advertising. This software giant stands at the crossroads of brands, agencies, media, technology, and data, effectively controlling the pulse of a $70 billion market.
I cold called the founders and said, you're sitting on $1 billion idea, and I'm the guy who's going to get you there.
Yet beneath the veneer of success lies an ocean of challenges.
You kind of see where the snowball needs to go, but there's lots of forces that prevent that from happening.
Comfortably settled industry giants, unwilling to let go of their familiar methods. These are your opponents. Imagine the challenge of shaking up the entrenched linear TV industry with a digital, data-driven vision.
I'm just starting to actually execute on the vision that I had 15 years ago, which is so incredibly unique.
Will you manage to crack the code?
Let me tell you maybe how I got here, which is...
Welcome to Top CEO. I'm chatting with Bill Wise, CEO of Mediaocean. And Bill, one of the things that's interesting about your vision for ad tech is some of the resistance that prevented that vision from taking place. Obviously, we've seen a huge growth in sort of digital media. Maybe other types of media that were not digital lag behind. Talk us maybe to start with this challenge you faced of you kind of see where the snowball needs to go, but there's lots of forces that prevent that from happening. And that was a primary challenge for Mediaocean.
Yeah, Ben, I thanks for having me on, and I appreciate the question. And when I look back, I had this vision for what is now Mediaocean 15 years ago. And the irony is I'm just starting to actually execute on the vision that I had 15 years ago, which is so incredibly unique, right? And let me tell you maybe how I got here, which is I started my career as an accountant. Luckily, I wasn't a very good one. So there was a digital advertising company called DoubleClick who hired me when they were a small startup that just moved from Atlanta to New York. Obviously, DoubleClick is part of Google now and a huge part of the ecosystem. But so I got into digital ad tech by happenstance, luck, and managed my way. And then I just became an entrepreneur, and I started a couple of companies. Some were successful, some weren't. My last company was a company called Right Media. We sold it to Yahoo. It was the first ever ad exchange. And I had the vision and idea back then is, hey, you had all these ad tech companies, but you had these marketers, large marketers like Procter & Gamble, Unilever, et cetera, who had all these brands and a couple $100 million to spend. If those companies thought of themselves as ad tech companies and not marketers, they'd actually be the second or third largest ad tech companies in the space. Again, this is 15 years ago. And so I actually went to Cincinnati, met with Procter & Gamble, and pitched them on becoming their own ad tech company. They ended up creating what became the first DSP in the market. We got $250 million to test this out from Procter & Gamble. I was in Cincinnati presenting to their marketing investment committee, and they said, hey, Bill, have you ever thought of applying all of this data-driven marketing to traditional media like television? And I said, Mark Pritchard at the time. I was like, I don't even know how TV is bought and sold. I'm a digital guy. And he was like, you should look into that, because for Procter & Gamble, digital is millions, traditional and TV is billions. And so kind of the entrepreneur in me was like, all right, how is television bought and sold?
Those numbers, those numbers work in my favor. Yes, I'd like to find a solution for this. I have Procter & Gamble telling me this. Yes.
Millions are great. Billions are better.
Billion sounds good. Yeah. Yes.
So everywhere I turned, there was this company called Donovan Data Systems, and for lack of a better analogy, they were the DoubleClick of TV, right? They were the ad tech company around processing all of the TV spend, and so literally the entrepreneur in me found a little startup in Chicago called MediaBank. I cold called the founders and said, you're sitting on $1 billion idea and I'm the guy who's going to get you there. And they were like, what's the vision? I was like, the vision is that the TV market eventually will look and feel like the digital ad tech market or digital advertising market looks today, right? It's going to be data driven. It's going to be programmatic. It's going to be automated, right? AI didn't exist then, but it's going to be laced in AI and automation. And so that was the vision I had for what's now Mediaocean. I had that in 2009. And the incredible part is the industry was so set in its ways that just now I'm starting to really realize on that vision that I had 15 years ago.
Well, and talk about some of the roadblocks and obstacles. When you say because maybe other CEOs can appreciate that, particularly ones that are trying to disrupt something, right? Because if you're trying to disrupt something kind of like by definition, it sort of needs disruption, but there's entrenched power there. And sometimes you can be like sort of more nimble and outmaneuver because like no one focuses on it. But other times, which I think is more in your case, people really want the status quo to be the status quo, right? There's sort of entrenched power in there that is vested in this staying the way it is that would see what you're trying to do as a threat.
Yes, 100%. So the way you buy and sell television, right? There's national television and there's spot and local TV. It basically hasn't changed in 3 or 4 decades. And so, when I first had this vision and ended up taking over the assets of MediaBank, which was a startup trying to disrupt kind of the TV space from a software perspective, organizations, it's like, hey, TV is not broke. In fact, it's the only thing we can count on, right? If you're a movie studio, dropping, some commercials.
It's not very precise, but it's like a big hammer. You got like whack-a-mole. It's big, it's powerful, and you're going to hit something with it.
Listen, it's tonnage, it's sight, sound, and motion, right? You can elicit an emotion. And if you need to get butts and seats, for the Barbie movie or for Oppenheimer, right? TV has always been the best way to do it. You want to sell cars, TV is it's a funnel and it's upper funnel. It's not precise, but it works and it's tonnage. And so companies like auto, CPG, movie studios, right? They've been relying on television for 40 years. It's not broke. It is the richest and most profitable for publishers. And it's incredibly efficient for advertisers and their agencies. So
what does that mean for the entrenched powers then that want the status quo, that it sort of took a while to work through and figure out how to do it?
They literally kicked me out of meetings. I would go into television organizations and talk about how digital is going to disrupt what you're doing. All media is going to be connected through an IP address, right? It's going to be digital. It's going to be programmatic. It's going to be data. And literally, I literally was physically removed from some organizations. And, and I literally thought to myself, I just ruined my career. I had a great digital advertising career. I literally just ruined my career. That's literally what I thought for about a year.
But then why was, I understand why they'd be entrenched in the way it is, but as, progress was sort of happening, as digital was rising as a part of budgets, does it start to change over time? Do people sort of say like, okay, I see how this is useful. Digital continues to take more and more of a bigger bite out of our pie. Either we reinvent or, we're going to, it might take a while, but eventually we become obsolete. Do people start coming over time?
Well, so the interesting part is there's been this tug of war between kind of the traditional linear guys and the digital folks, right? And so the digital folks, have been saying, hey, buy online video and CTV from us, right? And the TV folks were like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Buy it through the digital guys. It's immaterial. And so for the better part of 15 years, it was immaterial, right? It was just, and the other thing is the pandemic, what likely should have happened over 5 years in terms of transformation, in terms of digital transformation, happened in basically 5 months through the pandemic, right? Where all of a sudden, the levels of activity, just skyrocketed across platforms like Netflix, right? And Prime Video, et cetera. And so we saw a level of digital transformation that just, the pandemic really swept it and forced the market to say, oh, wow, now digital television or connected TV or CTV is now a pretty material portion, right? TV continues to be a $70 billion industry here in the US. It was 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and it still is today. CTV, which was less than $1 billion just a few years ago, is the fastest growing part of the market. And now finally, organizations can ignore it, right? But for the better part of the last 15 years, they completely ignored it.
Well, so how did you start to then overcome objections? You said you were like removed from meetings. People didn't want to talk to you. They didn't want to have your ideas spread in our organization. We don't like it. What did you do then? You said like, did you consider going back and like, we ought to just be a digital shop. Let's just focus on that. There's too much resistance. They're not ready for it. I'll see you guys in 10 years. Did you think about that? Or did you think about, how did you approach it? Or did you think like, hey, this is, side channel, I'm going to work this, build my other businesses, keep going. How did you think about how you approached that resistance?
We certainly built a digital business and a digital focus. But again, I was so confident in where the market ends up that I was like, I can't give this up, right? We have to transform this linear side of the TV business. And so, and it's not just TV. It's also things like radio, right? Like Pandora was starting to become popular, right? Spotify a little bit back then. So I didn't give up. And in fact, what's interesting, is if you want to disrupt an industry that doesn't want to be disrupted, the best way to do that is to own all the workflow for that industry. So we were a startup. There was a company called Donovan Data Systems that was founded in 1967, who basically had lack of a better term, like had a monopoly in how linear TV was bought and sold. They worked with every single ad agency in all the major markets, which gave them access to every single major marketer and had direct links into every single major broadcaster like NBC, CBS, Fox, et cetera. So I said, hey, if they're not going to, believe in my vision, I got to go on all the workflow and start changing the workflow. And so we ended up merging MediaBank, the startup I was running, merged with Donovan Data Systems to actually form Mediaocean, which is the name of the company today. And by virtue of that merger, we basically took over $70 billion of TV spend almost overnight. And then the real work started beginning, which is, all right, how do we transform this legacy business that kind of isn't broke, right? That was the biggest pushback I got, was stop trying to disrupt something that doesn't need to be disrupted. And it really was consumer behavior that needed to be the catalyst to make it, where they say, okay, fine, now we need to evolve or die.
Well, and how did take us back to the merger for a second, of that being sort of a critical moment. How did that come about? How was it done? How did all the players kind of sign off on that? How did sort of that deal work for both sides to make it work? Because if you're them, you're sitting on this. We have this asset, great. Why disrupt it? Why take a risk? I don't care what Bill tells me. We're kind of sitting pretty. We're kind of fat and happy. Why should we change?
Yeah. So for most people may know this, but the advertising ecosystem, there are 6 ad agency holding companies, incredibly large, that each handle tens of billions of dollars of.
You're talking about the WPPs and the Publicists and all
Omnicom, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So they had all 6. And so we started building workflow technology to compete with them. The difference is they didn't have any digital platform. So we started with digital, built a digital platform, but also started building and evolving TV, print, radio, out of home, all kind of the linear traditional media types. And so we ended up stealing one of the holding companies. So we got one major agency, which is an agency within Publicis Group, Starcom, MediaVest. We got them off of Donovan onto MediaBank. And then we got another holding company, IPG, on board, but just verbally on board. These are like ERP platforms. So, the implementations are like a year to a year and a half long. And so when we already had one of the agencies and we got one of the
then you're like, then you're starting to get attention.
Then I called Michael Donovan, founder, CEO, and 100% equity owner of Donovan Data Systems. And I said, hey, I have Starcom MediaVest. I got another one, and I'm going to get the rest of Publicis. I'm going to have 2 of the 6 in the U.S. We should join forces because I know exactly how to evolve this. We're in a knife fight over this traditional media. But meanwhile, Google, Facebook, this is before Amazon created an ad business. Google and Facebook, are basically building these incredible ad tech businesses. So we got to stop thinking about each other as the competition. The competition is actually Google and Facebook.
Yeah. So to kind of paraphrase this, one, you had to sort of get, who's going to become your partner's attention by getting some business to start with. So, you're a player, and then saying like, hey, we're actually partners, not competitors, is what we should be. And maybe we're not just partners, but maybe we ought to. How long was it before you kind of said like, let's talk merger, which is a big thing, right? Because you're like, maybe viewing each other as competitors. You're saying it's not really, because there's bigger competitors on the horizon, but kind of hard to be like, by the way, we were like rivals for the same, for this, I don't know, like rivals for the same girl. And now we should all like get married together, right? Let's just all be one happy family. How long did it take you, and what was that conversation like to kind of get there?
Well, they started looking at us as direct competitors because, we knew in order to kind of see the vision through, we needed to own all the workflows. So we directly were competitive with them for about a year and a half, 2 years. So there was a lot of resistance. I finally convinced Sir Michael Donovan, to merge. And then, one of the things we didn't expect, because at the end of the day, we weren't huge companies, was the U.S. Department of Justice took a liking to us. And some of the agencies actually loved the fact that MediaBank existed as an alternative to Donovan Data Systems. And so they actually came in and blocked the deal, saying it was bad for competition. And so, there was a lot we needed to overcome. The first being the U.S. government.
Well, and amazing. And not a lot of entrepreneurs because usually when you think like antitrust or anti-competition, I mean, this is at the scope of like the Googles and the Facebooks, like, but they're not going to like it if Google wants to acquire Facebook or the other way. But that's so like, that's just like such like massive, massive companies that you usually think like, how do we even get on the radar? So, you think you're making progress. You've gone through all these challenges. Now you have actually like your competitor is now your partner. You're going to work together. And what did that just like blow your mind? Like what, the U.S. government now? Actually, like we thought we were in this like niche market and we're building a really, really nice business, but not so much that like, big folks in Washington are paying attention, and suddenly they are. What did you think?
Yeah, I have a lot of respect. Through this process, I have a lot of respect. I've always had a lot of respect for people who dedicate their lives to things like education and government, to be create a better place for humanity. What I didn't respect is just how diligent these people are, and trying to explain kind of the ad ecosystem, to someone in government who has never spent a lick of time in it. It's complex, and it almost sounds like my kids always tell me, it sounds like you're speaking a different language. You're on work calls, and it's true. But I also think they had the best intentions, right? At the end of the day, I did provide an alternative that none of the ad agencies had, over the previous 20, 30, 40 years, literally. When we merged with Donovan, they were over 40 years old. And so I respect what they were trying to do. And I actually think we became a better company in business because what we needed to do to get approval from the Department of Justice was actually go and talk to our our major clients, which were the ad agencies and the major marketers. And we got to listen to them, what are their needs? And almost created, in essence, kind of a roadmap for what we needed to accomplish to eventually achieve the vision that I had, back in 2009. And so
you had sort of
I think it was
like a government. Well, as I say, you had like government mandated or government forced process to like really, really listen to your customers and really, really develop a plan that served them well.
100%. And it's a reminder that, you just want to delight your customers, right? At the end of the day, if you are a software technology platform, you want to delight your customers. And if you do, they're happy, and happy customers buy, right? And so in a way, it almost got back to the fundamentals for us, and provided us a North Star.
So how did that resolve? So you went and did the listening tour. What finally resolved with the Department of Justice that let this go through? What did you prove? What steps did you have to take to make that happen?
Yeah. So they basically said, we explained, hey, listen, there are these 6 holding companies, WPP, Omnicom, Publicis, et cetera. They actually have IT organizations that dwarf ours, right? And so they're large, complex, multi-billion-dollar organizations. The DOJ said, all right, if that's the case, and if your competition really is Google and Facebook, then your clients should be supportive of this deal. So if they're supportive of this deal, maybe we will. And so we went on the listening tour. We went on the tour, and we went back to the DOJ, and we said, Mr. DOJ, this is a great exercise. All of our customers, most of our customers are supportive of the deal. They get it now. And they said, great, get it in writing. And so when I went back to all the holding companies and said, hey, I now need to put this in writing, then it became a negotiation, and so it was an ordeal. It was an ordeal that lasted almost a year.
Meaning a negotiation, was it a negotiation not just for what's in the letter, but a negotiation for like our deal with you? Because if this goes through, we're your customer, we're putting a ton of cash through you, and we know you need us right now. So we're going to like negotiate a deal with you now, even as a letter, as a factor in this. Is that the case when you say negotiate?
That's exactly right. What the irony is what ended up happening was, one, the agencies were able to then basically reopen negotiations, because now they went from having an alternative to now basically not having an alternative. Although we all know, who cares about the way traditional's bought and sold? Everything's moving to digital, and there's lots of competition in digital. But we ended up creating long-term contracts with our major clients as a result of this, which they had protection on, and they also had the ability to dictate what direction we were going in terms of building software. And so, so that's where we ended up.
I see. So the trade-off was you got this deal through. The benefit is you have long-term clients that are big clients, and you could make sure it worked out for you economically okay, but they probably got a better deal than they otherwise would. And that satisfied the Justice Department because basically all these negotiations went on anyway. So they sort of, the negotiating power that you get through competition, almost like the Justice Department provided it. They just like did it by fact of needing letters, caused it. And so in a sense, it resolved itself, and maybe not as great a deal as you could have gotten, but you got the deal done and you transformed things and all parties were satisfied.
And the day after this was completed, we had $120 billion of ad spend going through our platform. $120 billion. And so that's that. Then the question was like, all right, how is that $120 billion going to evolve over time? And what do we need to do now to start transforming that business and continue to transform that business, now where we are now in 2023, right? And so that started on our path. And basically that created, in essence, an ERP business for the advertising industry, right? Where we look more like an Oracle or an SAP.
Well, and just to sort of explain how, for people that don't track like advertising and ERP, which is kind of like sort of like the system that like kind of handles operations for companies, just explain what that means and this kind of vision coming through, this sort of like almost like operating system for like for the advertising industry.
Yeah, it really is like an operating system, right? It's a lot of the back office functions. I say all the time, people don't really care about plumbing and electricity until it doesn't work. And then you really care. And so Mediaocean really provides a lot of that plumbing and electricity, right? It's a lot of, back office, integration of financials, invoicing, reconciliation, bill pay, but also all of the media procurement. And so, it's very sticky, high customer retention, high net revenue retention. Basically customers, when they find, kind of these systems of record, very difficult. I mean, it would take an organization
it takes a whole initiative and years to move off it. So you sort of have entrenched customers that are gonna, for the most part, stay with you. But that was, of course, is a little bit of like the sort of classic good to great scenario. It's like, now you're the entrenched. You wanted to disrupt this. Now but then, there can be someone who comes along too and wants to disrupt that as well. So it starts all over again.
100%, which goes back to the lesson I learned from the DOJ, which is it doesn't matter your position. There's always someone who's going to want to disrupt you. And so even if you have this great, position where you're grained in, you have high customer retention, you can't rest on that, right? You need to continue to innovate. And that's what, and I say all the time, running a company is not a sprint. It's also not a marathon. It's a relay race. And, and you have points in the maturation of a company, where you're handing the baton off and you're running the next leg of the race. And so, MediaBank was the first leg, then the merger with Donovan was the second leg. The third leg really was around the pandemic, which was, all right, that's great that we have this software that's ingrained and it's a lot of back office, but a lot of what's happening and the vision I had for, how do you really take TV to the next level and to the current century, is around ad tech. And so we started this path to invest, and we've so far invested about $1 billion, but invest in acquiring ad tech assets that gets us closer to the vision of transforming, all media and omnichannel together. And so we acquired this company called 4C, which had programmatic software that bought all the walled gardens being, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn, now TikTok, et cetera. And then the second business was a company called Flash Talking, which had software that dynamically optimized creative and had an ad server that competed with DoubleClick. And so now not only do we have this kind of vertical ERP for advertising in this operating system, but now we have some of, if that's the back office, now we have some of the front office, which are these ad tech solutions that gets us closer to the vision of how do we transform this industry into an omni-channel, data-driven, programmatic industry.
And so when the day after, when the Department of Justice signed off, when was that? What year was that? When the deal actually went through? That was
2012, 2013. So about 10 years ago.
Okay, 2012, about 10 years ago. And then it took sort of all that time. Now you're building. And all of these kind of other solutions are coming. Hence your relay race, or hence these different chapters in the company. This new chapter begins when all of that happens. And does, for other, entrepreneurs, for other CEOs that maybe, haven't kind of like grown through strategic mergers or acquisitions, what is your advice on how to approach that? Because that can be daunting if you're new to it, because it's fraught with danger of, yes, it makes sense theoretically that this piece adds, but there can be problems in company culture. There could be software that doesn't match with other software. There's all these pieces. Since you've done it a few times, and obviously it's been critical to the journey of Mediaocean, what is your advice for that, sort of like either acquisition or merger as a way to grow?
Yeah, the advice is don't, F it up. Because it's so disruptive that you have to get it right. I found out, after Google acquired DoubleClick, I saw the number of people that Google had in corporate development. I thought was crazy, right? It's like, all right, you have, people who buy companies. Why do you need 100 people like when you're buying companies? But it wasn't, people buying companies. It was people integrating companies, right? Because you cannot get the integration wrong. And by the way, we failed a bunch, which is why I think we're getting better at it because we failed a bunch. But you hit it like
what do you mean by failed a bunch? Like, what does that mean? You mean in terms of integrating companies together, just like it took you too long, or it ultimately didn't work, and you had to just like abandon it, or what do you mean by failed?
In a world of data and AI and software, acquisitions are largely about people and culture. It is understanding the culture that made that company work and not killing it, right? And it's very hard to do when you're a much larger organization. Maybe the other company is this, startup entrepreneurial spirit, and we're this larger, slower moving company. You have to figure out how to keep the attributes of what made them special. And if you don't, or figure out how to kind of merge the things together, there's certainly software and code base. You can figure that stuff out. What you can't figure out is, the North Star, right? And making sure that the cultures connect, and that it's additive to the business. I would say a vast, vast, vast majority of M&A activity are failures. There's a vision, but it is so hard to execute on that vision when naturally things are going to change, right? People are going to change, processes are going to change, right? And it's disruptive. And so, we now have, some of our best and brightest, working on integrations because that's how critical it is. And you got to listen, right? We had processes, we had things. Luckily, in this last acquisition we did was Flash Talking, which was about a $500 million deal. They had some really strong executives with really good experience. And they came in here and said, listen, we're 3 weeks in, you're already screwing things up. As the CEO, I never want to hear that, but sometimes you need to just listen and you need to hear it and you need to, then change, the way you're thinking about it. And you have to care about culture and people and process. Because if you screw it up, it's just so much costly than just not even doing the deal in the first place.
Sure. Well, and ironic for when you think of technology companies or software companies that hey, what has to work is the technology or software, but no matter what your business, it actually comes back to people and aligning people and having a common vision and working together. And the issue is, which you see a lot too, is that maybe you acquired this company because they were special in some way. I mean, maybe it was a piece in your ecosystem, but maybe just it was special. You were acquiring them for that specialness, which actually emanates from the people and the culture. And the minute you kill it, you just sort of killed the thing that made you want to buy it in the first place.
Yeah. And by the way, big companies are the worst at this, right? Because they have their, if you're Oracle, I'm not picking on Oracle, but Oracle did a bunch of acquisitions, in the ad tech space. So, it's like, all right, we don't even think about this. A client, Unilever says, hey, we want to start talking to you about your solutions. Here's an NDA. We go, great. Sign the NDA. Boom, you're done. You sell a company to Oracle, getting that NDA signed may take 3 weeks, right? By then, Unilever's off to the next startup, right? So, you gotta respect both sides, but, you have to, you hit it on the head. There's the special sauce that you acquire a company for. Don't kill the special sauce.
Well, and my finally to wrap up your journey, I'd love to get your take on how do you sort of, as a CEO, stay true to your vision over time and maybe over long periods of time. And maybe, in the interim of that time, you have a vision, you go do businesses goes in other ways. Maybe you continue to grow, but maybe there's something larger out there that it seems like you are still in search of to, kind of put all these sort of fragmented parts of the business together into one thing. What is your advice for sort of, staying true to your vision, even when a lot of CEOs, very common to face this, is like, you could be too early to the party. You can be like, it's going to get there, but if you don't time that right when people are ready for it, you're not going to be successful either. How do you stay true to your vision over time?
Yeah. And listen, my first vision for the business, I was 10 years early to the party, right? But luckily I was able to kind of generate revenue in other ways and kind of wait it out, until now, basically. What I would say is, I say all the time, like, I'm actually not qualified to do anything in Mediaocean other than run it. So it's a good thing I'm CEO. Surround yourselves with the best talent. Surround yourselves with people who are much better than you. And then that allows you to focus on, some of the soft skills, like, what is your company, what is your company culture? What do you want that to represent? How do you think about your greatest asset, which is your people? And where do we need to be in the next 2, 3, and 5 years, right? And so I spent a lot of time thinking in the lens of my investors, who have a 3, 5, or 7 year horizon. How am I going to double or triple their money in that time frame? And do I have the right assets today to get there? Are there new assets I need, to add on to this? And then are those assets, can I build them myself? Can I partner, with companies in the ecosystem, or do I need to go out and acquire it? And so, I spend a lot of time thinking about the next 2 to 3 years, mostly because I have the luxury of doing that because I have a great team, who's much better than me, who's managing the day to day. And I think, obviously, if you're less than 10 million in revenue and you're the CEO, you're doing everything. You're talking to the top clients, you're managing the product, the product roadmap and pipeline, and you're putting out fires, right? Then you grow, the next phase is like 50 million in revenue, then 100 million in revenue, and then $250 million of revenue. When you, get to a level that where we are today, the business, I can't add anything to the day-to-day of the business, other than making sure our customers are delighted, figuring out what the next 2 to 3 to 5 years look like, and how do we make our investors and customers happy. So I would say surround yourself with the best talent possible and let them do their job.
Through the lens of audacious ambition and tenacity, the world of advertising was forever transformed. Once a bastion of traditional methods, resistant to change, it found itself at the precipice of a digital, data-driven revolution. The initial rejection was fierce, a veritable storm pushing against an unstoppable force. Yet, a strategic maneuver gave the trailblazer the reins of a $70 billion industry, allowing for an influx of disruptive innovation. But the journey didn't end at the point of success. Amidst the sense of security offered by an established position, the shadow of disruption loomed large. The response? A ceaseless drive for innovation and $1 billion investment into ad tech assets, each an integral brick in the foundation of an omnichannel, data-driven future. Each challenge met, each solution crafted, was a testament to the power of visionary resilience. The industry resisted. The stakeholders watched warily. Yet the relentless stride of progress couldn't be held back. The journey unveiled an invaluable lesson. To thrive in an ever-evolving landscape, one must be the harbinger of change, not its bystander. And with that, its case closed.